Greetings, my name is Amy Pickard and I am the curator of the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library's Grosvenor Rare Book Room that is housed in the Central Library in downtown Buffalo on Lafayette Square. I would like to share with you two Twainian stories. The first story is about how the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library became the fortunate and proud owner of Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn manuscript. The second story is about Mark Twain's time here in Buffalo. The Grosvenor Rare Book Room in the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library is most privileged to own the manuscript of Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, thanks to the three men you see here. Josephus N. Larned, Samuel Clemens' friend and former co-editor at the Buffalo Express, suggested that the Young Men's Association Library might want to consider purchasing documents and letters by famous persons that could be exhibited to the public. No one in the Young Men's Association Library Board responded favorably to that suggestion except one newly elected member of the board, a local attorney named James Fraser Gluck. Working in concert with Larned, Gluck began to assemble a wide-ranging collection of manuscript documents and letters. And although Gluck himself seems to have purchased the bulk of the collection at his own expense, he also would write gracious letters to authors on library letterhead requesting the donation of their manuscripts. When he wrote to Samuel Clemens, November 7, 1885, his request was a success. Twain replied favorably in a 4-page letter to Gluck dated November 12, 1885. As Twain wrote, "I will comply as far as I can with the greatest pleasure." In November of 1885, Clemens sent a total of 487 leaves to Gluck, including this sketch of the title page and nearly all of the text of the last half of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Clemens said that this was the only portion of the manuscript that was available. He thought then that the missing parts had been destroyed by the printer. Gluck immediately took the manuscript to a local binder and had the 487 leaves bound. Sometime after November 1885, when Gluck had already had the manuscript bound, Clemens found and sent an additional 209 leaves. These were chapters 31 through 37, the missing part of the last half of the manuscript. For some reason, Gluck never had this second set of leaves bound. From this point in time, there was no more information as to the fate of the first half of the manuscript. Lo and behold, in February 1991, the world found that the first half of the manuscript had not been destroyed. It had been found in a trunk in the attic of one of Gluck's granddaughters in Hollywood, California. What had happened in 1887 was that Clemens had found the first half and sent it to Larned. Gluck would, as was his custom, most likely remove the manuscript to have it bound. However, he failed to have this done. Then Gluck died unexpectedly in 1897, and the manuscript was probably turned over to his widow, who moved to Hollywood in the late 1920s to stay near her daughters. After the manuscript was discovered, it was turned over to Sotheby's auction house in New York City. The Buffalo and Erie County Public Library set about proving that the manuscript rightfully belonged to the library, and an agreement was reached so that on July 28, 1992, the two halves of the manuscript were finally reunited in Buffalo. It had been 105 years since they had last been together. Today, this literary masterpiece is at the heart of the library in the Mark Twain Room, which opened to the public on May 12, 1995. Recognizing the manuscript's importance, the Buffalo Public Library began collecting related publications in the early 1930s. The library compiled a large foreign language collection of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, establishing its international as well as American significance. If you visit the Mark Twain room today, you will find some of the foreign language editions in cabinets on the side of the room, and the trunk is on display in front of the mantle that was salvaged from Clemens' house on Delaware. You can view the digitized manuscript in its entirety on a kiosk in the room. You can also view or study it online in the library's digital collections. Upon learning how Buffalo came to own the Huckleberry manuscript, you may wonder how or why Clemens came to Buffalo. Well, on February 4th, 1869, Olivia Langdon of Elmira, New York, accepted the marriage proposal of the young Samuel Clemens. Clemens decided that he needed to settle down. He was worried he could not earn a living strictly through his writing. He decided to become an editor and set about negotiating an interest in a newspaper. He contacted several papers, including ones in New York, Cleveland, Hartford, and Toledo. At one point, it looked as though he would end up in Cleveland. However, Clemens found out rather last minute that a partial interest in the Buffalo Express was up for sale. Since Livy was from Elmira and Jervis Langdon, Clemens' future father-in-law, had business connections in Buffalo, Clemens decided to purchase part of the Express for $25,000, half funded by a loan from Jervis Langdon. Owning a one-third interest in the Buffalo Morning Express, Clemens moves to Buffalo in August 1869 and becomes an editor. On August 21st, Twain announced himself in print to the Express readers, quote, "Being a stranger, it would be immodest and unbecoming in me to suddenly and violently assume the associate editorship of the Buffalo Express without a single explanatory word. I am not going to introduce any startling reforms or in any way attempt to make trouble. I am simply going to do my plain, unpretending duty when I cannot get out of it. I shall work diligently and honestly and faithfully at all times and upon all occasions, when privation and want shall compel me to do it. In writing, I shall always confine myself strictly to the truth, except when it is attended with inconvenience. I shall not often meddle with politics because we have a political editor who is already excellent and only needs to serve a term in the penitentiary in order to be perfect. I shall not write any poetry unless I conceive a spite against the subscribers." Thus he introduced himself to Buffalo. 14 East Swan Street was the location of the Buffalo Express office where Twain worked. The image on the left is from 1868. On the right is the view looking down East Swan from 1895. Once found between Main and Washington Streets, these structures were located where the Ellicott Square building now stands today in downtown Buffalo. Almost every Sunday, one of his articles made its appearance. There are about 60 such articles signed by the author, as well as a great number of unsigned articles. He also worked on the People and Things column with Josephus N. Larned, the Express political editor, and whenever either editor hit a roadblock and was at a loss for words, they swapped articles and completed each other's stories. Mark Twain, as Buffalonians knew him, was a man of quiet, reserved disposition who worked without regard for office hours. From 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 in the evening, or even past midnight, he would sit at his desk in the old Express office scanning exchanges or writing comments and editorials. And then every weekend Clemens would travel to Elmira to visit Livy. In October 1869, he took to a lecture tour. He still contributed to the Express by mailing in his articles. With the proceeds from his speaking engagements, Clemens paid off Jervis Langdon and had money for the fast-approaching wedding. After the lecture tour ended, Clemens and Olivia Langdon married in Elmira on February 2nd, 1870. On February 3rd, 1870, they returned to Buffalo. Mr. Slee, Mr. Langdon's business agent, ordered sleighs to pick up the Clemens family and their wedding party since snow was falling in Buffalo. The coachman managed to lose the rest of the wedding party and proceeded to drive aimlessly around the city. When they arrived at 472 Delaware, the house was ablaze with lights, and the friends who had preceded the bride and groom came down the steps. Jervis Langdon, Samuel Clemens' father-in-law, presented the couple with the mansion at 472 Delaware on the west side near Virginia Street. Clemens, in his ever-witty fashion, declared that his father-in-law could visit the house and even stay there for free of charge if he liked. This house is no longer standing because it actually burned in 1963, but the two-story carriage house is still there. The house is where the Cloisters restaurant was until a few years ago. On March 26, 1870, Clemens accepted the editorship of a department at the Galaxy magazine. Although he still wrote one or two sketches for the Express each month, his plan was to devote more time to a new book to follow up Innocents Abroad, which had become a bestseller after being first issued on July 20th, 1869. On July 15th, 1870, Clemens signs a contract with the American Publishing Company to produce by January 1st a book about his experiences in California and Nevada. Then tragedy begins to unfold for the Clemenses. On August 6, 1870, Jervis Langdon dies unexpectedly of a stomach cancer. Mrs. Langdon returns to Buffalo with the Clemens family, as does Emma Nye, Livy's childhood friend. In September of 1870, Emma Nye develops typhoid fever and dies on September 29th in the couple's bed. Livia had been pregnant through the summer and rather ill, and on November 7th, 1870, she delivered her only son prematurely, a sickly child who never learned to walk and who died of diphtheria in 1872. She was dangerously ill and remained bedridden all winter. In February 1871, Livy became more sick, and Sam wrote to his brother, Orion, "I am still nursing Livy night and day and cannot write anything. I am nearly worn out. We shall go to Elmira 10 days hence, if Livia can travel on a mattress, and stay there until I can finish the California book, say 3 months." On March 18th, the couple leaves for Elmira, giving up his editorship at both publications and selling the house on October 1871 at a loss of $1,000. The Express did not note his departure in the paper. Only a little more than a year after their marriage, Twain wrote bitterly to a friend, "You do not know what it is to be in a state of absolute frenzy, desperation. I would rather die twice over than repeat the last 6 months of my life." End quote. As biographer Justin Kaplan writes, he loathed Buffalo. What he remembered now was not the night he was tricked into entering the gaslit fairyland on Delaware Avenue, but instead the months of illness, drudgery, failure. On March 2nd, 1871, he put up the sale of his interest in the Express. Livy was still so ill that she was carried to Elmira on a mattress. A piece of him, however, remained behind, the home at 472 Delaware Avenue, where he spent his honeymoon and where his first child was born. There he experienced perhaps his greatest happiness and his greatest misery. There he wrote the best parts of Roughing It, and may have begun Tom Sawyer and other masterpieces which he eventually completed and published. He was now more interested in writing books for enormous profits than in editing a daily newspaper and a humorous column in a monthly magazine for a piddly few $1,000s a year. His Buffalo experience has significance because it was the final stage in a long campaign for an artistic existence free of financial worries and of the burdens of journalistic writing. While brief, his time here was significant and worthy of recognition, since it shaped him as both a writer and a person. Twain's time in Buffalo was a turning point in his life. While here, he realized that he was a writer, not a journalist, and he never looked back. While living at 472 Delaware, he gradually separated himself from the grind of 8 a.m. to midnight shifts at a daily newspaper. He became more of a man of leisure, able to afford the luxury of beginning Roughing It and working on a monthly column for the Galaxy. Life in Buffalo prepared him to lead a life of letters. This is a photograph by Charles L. Pond, who's a noted stereo photographer in Buffalo from 1862 to 1882. In 1870, Pond took a series of views from the scaffolding around a steeple of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. These views, taken from 265 feet above the ground, form the first panoramic view of Buffalo. You're looking at Main Street near Shelton Square, located where the Main Place Mall is today. The Young Men's Association is also included. This would have been stomping grounds for Twain when he lived here in Buffalo. All of what you have just seen and more is viewable in the Central Library's Mark Twain room. I hope you have enjoyed seeing and hearing about Twain's time when he lived here in Buffalo and how the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library came to own Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn original manuscript. We encourage you to see the Huck Finn manuscript online in our digital collections. It is navigable from the main address shown here on the screen. We also invite you to come see the Mark Twain room on the first floor and other displays around the Central Library. The library's open hours and directions are all posted on the library's website. Thank you for taking an interest in this library and its community's relationship with Mark Twain.